Hello, my name is Joanne Knight. Welcome to the barn. I want to talk to you today about one of the what I call forgotten features of Creative Studio. We know about the draw boundaries and the border corner and edge to edge and repeat patterns, those big names in Creative Studio, but there's some features that are just as important that we sometimes forget about and how they can be beneficial to us whenever we're quilting our quilts. So Orient Baseline is going to be the topic of today. Back in earlier versions of Creative Studio, whenever you drew a boundary, Orient Baseline came into play. And what that means is your first two clicks of your boundary, of draw boundary, determines not only the baseline of the pattern, but the angle of the pattern. With version 7, when you do draw boundary, the baseline is always going to be on the bottom. And if you have Orient Baseline selected, then that would also determine, depending on where those first two clicks are, what the orientation of your pattern is. So I'm going to select this boundary. I'm going to select this Rachel Stripes triangle by Laurie Thomas, and I'm going to go pattern to boundary. Just like that. Now, Creative Studio is going to honor the margin of the pattern or the margin of the project as best it can. So I'm going to move this one out of the way. And triangles always gave us an issue whenever we were doing pattern to boundary in earlier versions of the software. I'm going to select this rustic block pattern, again by Laurie Thomas, and I'm going to have the boundary selected, and I'm going to say pattern to boundary. Now the block is symmetrical, so that's all well and good. If I select this boundary right here and I go right up here to pattern boundary and I hit this little drop down arrow, there is this last feature down on the bottom, and it's Orient Baseline, and I'm going to select it, and you will see this blue dotted line with the arrow at the end of it on the right side. That's because when I clicked this boundary, I started in the lower right corner and went up to the upper right corner. So with the pattern, the rustic block pattern that I have selected, if I do pattern to boundary, the pattern comes in there and you don't really know whether it's turned differently or not because the pattern is symmetrical. If I select the pattern and I right click and I go down to options and I say show none and then do it again and say show all, then you see that the start and end of the pattern is in the lower left on the boundary on the left side, but it's in the lower right on the boundary on the right side. So let me get rid of this one and let me show you if I select that boundary and I select the triangle pattern again and I do pattern to boundary, you can see that it turns the triangle pattern at a different angle because of the way the Orient Baseline is clicked. Orient Baseline, the first two clicks do not have to be long clicks. They can be really small clicks. In the case of this one, that is done on a 45-degree angle. It's just those first two clicks. So I'm going to select this triangle. This pattern is selected, and I am going to do pattern to boundary, and you can see, bless its heart, the way this pattern comes in, and it's because when I clicked the boundary, I clicked it going from south to north on a 45-degree angle. Get rid of this one because he's kind of pitiful, and I'm going to uncheck Orient Baseline, select the triangle, and select the boundary, do pattern to boundary, and you can see it comes in nice and pretty. So it was decided that that would be so much easier, especially when placing triangles, if the baseline was always on the bottom with version 7. But let's look at a couple of ways that it can really benefit you to use Orient Baseline. Now, the other thing that you have to remember as far as the rules are concerned with Orient Baseline is it can only be used with standard. It cannot be used with stretch as far as pattern to boundary. So if I change this on the drop down to say stretch, number 1, pattern to boundary stretch can only have 4 clicks on a boundary. Otherwise, it's not going to behave the way it needs to. But if I hit that little down arrow again, you may not can see it, but Orient Baseline is grayed out and it will not allow me to select it because you cannot use it with stretch. So let's go back to standard and let's go over to, let me toggle this one as sewn because that's just a reminder to myself. So say we've got this shape right here and we want to do draw text in this particular shape. So I'm going to go up to draw and I'm going to do draw text, and you can see that it's the only draw function that does not have a shortcut. So I'm going to left click on draw text and I'm going to type in thanks, move my mouse to the screen, and this is the way that this text is going to come in whenever I select that boundary. So I'm going to say OK, and you would probably then select the text and turn it and pull it this way and pull it this way, and then you've got to adjust it some more. So that's a lot of work to be able to do that. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to go right here and I'm going to do Orient Baseline, and I'm going to select this, and I'm going to go back to draw text, and this time I'm going to type in the word thanks, and when I do, this is the way that it comes into the boundary. It's going to pay attention to the margin for pattern to boundary, and it's going to place that wording in there. So let's do another example. I've got 2 more for you. I'm going to select this on point boundary right here, and we're going to say that I have this block, the on point boundary. I'm going to say pattern to boundary, and this is the way that the pattern comes in, because again, the baseline is on the bottom regardless of how the boundary is drawn. So you would have to select it. You could probably type in 45 for your angle and then go to your F10 handles and pull it out, which wouldn't be real hard to do, but it still is an extra effort. So let's get rid of that. I'm going to go and say Orient Baseline. Now you can see that I started basically at home plate. I started in the 6 o'clock position and drew my boundary up to the 3 o'clock position. So now when I select that boundary and my pattern is selected and I do pattern to boundary, watch what happens. You see how much easier that is? So much less adjusting to be able to do that. So that's a great way to use Orient Baseline. Let me show you the last little piece that I have for you. I'm going to go to my File, Recent Projects, and I'm going to go to the quilt that I was working on called Rustic Trails. Let me go find that for you. And on this particular quilt, what I had was sashings. It was a big project, guys. You can see how long it's taken to open that up. Let me go back this way. This is my mock-up. Let me turn off my markers. This is my mock-up right here. It's a beautiful quilt, and I love it. The piece and pattern is by Lisa Bonjean, and this is my total mock-up of my quilt. And you can see that what it's got is horizontal sashing, and it has vertical sashing on that particular quilt. And the pattern that I used, well, in fact, all the patterns that I use are patterns by Laurie Thomas, and they're called Rustic Trails. This is the one that was the sashing pattern that went both vertically and horizontally. It's not a point-to-point pattern. So I needed to do each one of these, or I needed to drag it to the screen and hit my space bar and rotate it around to be able to fit in those boundaries that I have. So instead of doing that every single time, what I did was allow Orient Baseline to work for me. So here are two of my sashings right here. I'm going to select this one. My pattern is selected. Let me uncheck Orient Baseline for this first one. Once my pattern's selected, I'm going to do pattern to boundary, and this is the way the pattern comes in because that's the way Creative Studio is written. So I can select it, I can hit my space bar, and I can make it bigger, just like that. And with very little adjustment, I'm ready to quilt it. So I'm going to get rid of this one. Now, if I go back to Orient Baseline, and you can see that I just made those first two little clicks. And your tip on that is if your first two clicks are short, you run a better chance of having the pattern go in straight than you do if you make a longer click between your first and second click. And you'll see what I'm talking about here in just a second because of that angle. Select my boundary. My pattern is selected. I'm going to do pattern to boundary, and it places that pattern, and it just could not get any easier than that right there. I can live with that one, so now it's ready to quilt just that fast. On this one on the right side, I've got my boundary selected, and I'm going to do pattern to boundary, and you're going to see that that came in a little crooked. And again, the reason that it did is because that second click that I made on that draw boundary was a little bit crooked, and so because it was a little bit crooked, then the pattern came in crooked. If I select this pattern, which is at an angle of 94.38, and I change the angle to 90 degrees, you can tell by looking at that that particular sashing wasn't as straight as it needed to be. So I can go to my F8 handles, and I can use my gray handle and pull this side up and pull this side up, a little bit right here and a little bit right here, and I've got it adjusted and ready to go. But Orient Baseline sure did make this quilt a whole lot easier to be able to quilt it out whenever it came to those horizontal sashings. So I hope that's something that you'll be able to use and you'll think about the next time that you use Creative Studio and you have a block on point, or you have an odd angle of a boundary, or you have vertical sashing that you need to do, because we seem to run into a lot of those. Thank you.